House Bill 2438 will help expand broadband services. And the House and Senate vote to end the emergency declaration. Hello everyone, I'm Rhonda Pearson. We have an update for you today from our 68th District Representative, Clint Owlett. Clint, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rhonda.
Last week, the House of Representatives passed unanimously HB 2438. That would help in the expansion of broadband services. What can you tell us about this bill?
Yeah, it's a really great bill that really sets us on a path of success for reaching the last mile with broadband services. We've realized that rural co-ops are going to play a very integral part in making that happen. They have the infrastructure that currently goes out to that last mile. However, and Tri-County's really been leading the way in the state on this in trying to provide this service. However, one thing that we're seeing is some easements that maybe were written back in the 50s and 60s and 70s may not have included communication lines in that easement. So a really great example would be this. Say you are going to purchase your grandparents' farm, okay? And they're going to build a small house down the road. Well, when they do the new easement for the new lines to feed the new house, they would have communication lines written into that easement. However, the easement that they wrote when they established that farm back in the whenever, say the 50s or 60s, may not have had communications in that easement. So even though the electric lines run right through there. So what we're doing is this would add communication lines to those older easements. Any new infrastructure obviously is going to have that language already in it. And so hopefully this will just pave the way, make it a little bit easier as we continue to bring value to those properties and service to those homes. That's the goal. And man, people are so excited about just even talking about it,
Yes.
and moving the ball a little bit down the field has been exciting for people. So it's been an honor to lead this through the House. It's headed to the Senate now. We'll see what happens over there. I was on a conference call with some folks today trying to figure out kind of a path moving forward for it, but man, it would be a big deal.
So is this the end of your work in broadband services or just the beginning?
This is just the beginning, and like I said, we got to get it through the Senate yet, but this doesn't provide any additional funding or other mechanisms that's going to need to take place to be able to finish the job. I know Tri-County, like I said, they're working on this. The other thing it does is it helps our telephone and cable folks as well, because they'll be able to offer services through some of these easements. So it's a really great option for folks. It's paving the way for the future. The future is going to be through rural co-ops, I think, to get to that last mile. It's the only way it makes sense.
Well, the House and Senate also passed a concurrent resolution, H.R. 836, that would end the emergency declaration here in Pennsylvania. Tell us a little more about this and the next step.
Yeah, so this has created some confusion, obviously.
Yes.
People think that basically everything's over since we passed it. I think the first thing we need to start out with is for people to realize that this is not a bill, it's a resolution. Why it had to be a resolution was it's not something that the governor really can veto because he vetoes bills. But the only way to end an emergency declaration or disaster declaration is through a concurrent resolution that goes through the House and the Senate. And that basically directs that the governor has to issue a proclamation ending that disaster declaration. So the disaster declarations were designed for short-term operations, for short-term impacts in a community. Say there's a flood or a hurricane, some sort of a natural disaster, or early on in a pandemic. It totally would make sense for a disaster declaration. Well, we've been into this for 3 months, and the governor just decided last week to go ahead and add another 90 days to it, basically continuing to give himself the power to make a lot of decisions on his own, bypassing the legislature. And we have been trying to be engaged in this whole reopening process. The whole pandemic from day one, we initiated virtual voting. We can vote from our offices now, so we don't even necessarily have to go to the Capitol to vote. but we have done everything in our power to make sure that we can be engaged in the process. So the House, in a bipartisan way, Democrats and Republicans came together and said, now is the time. It's time for us to re-engage in this process, work together as duly elected officials so that the 60th District has a voice in the opening process. We've been posting a lot about, talking about frustrations that we hear, right here in the district. Us being able to reopen the government in a way that it's supposed to operate, and that will give the 68th District, that will give your viewers a better voice in the reopening process. So, like I said, it was bipartisan. It wasn't just Republicans. It was Republicans and Democrats coming together saying, enough is enough. One of my Democrat colleagues, he stood up and said when we were debating this, he said, 13 weeks is enough. It's time to open up. And then he sat down. That was it. And he's right. I agree early on that the disaster declaration makes sense, but I don't think anybody would say we are in a statewide state of emergency right now. And so that's what it was early designed for, a quick movement of resources, dollars, programs, whatever we needed. But now it's time to re-engage. Now, there are some people that are concerned about unemployment benefits, whether we're going to lose federal funding. None of that changes. Everything stays the same there. And the one thing I will say is that the Department of Health's declarations that they're putting out, a lot of that's going to stay in place. But the reopening process needs to be in the hands of the General Assembly and the Senate and the House, working with the governor together, hand in hand, how we can make sure that we all have a voice and get started in a safe way that we can save our communities. In addition to the disaster declaration resolution that we passed, it directs that the governor signs a proclamation to end the declaration. Now, the governor has decided not to do that. So people are wondering where we're at, what's the next step. So basically, this is ending in court right now. So today, nothing has changed because the ending of the resolution or the implementation of the resolution, I believe, and a lot of people have arguments about this, and that's what's created the confusion. But he has not officially signed a declaration or a proclamation ending that disaster declaration. So we're in court right now. I think it will go quickly because it is creating mass confusion across the Commonwealth as to, are we in the disaster declaration? Are we not? Are we allowed to open? So it's created some confusion, but what it's going to do is force a decision to be made in the courts. And we will definitely keep people posted as to what comes from that. But it's important to note that the goal here is to work together.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. And I wanted to move on to, you have an exciting podcast coming up with Zach Schamberg, the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. What will that topic be about?
Yeah, I had a chance to talk with Zach during a hearing this past week, and it was really interesting to hear his perspective. He, long-term care, nursing facilities, personal care homes, that's kind of his specialty. And he understands this like nobody I've ever seen. So after this hearing, I reached out and said, hey, I do this podcast. I would love to talk with you a little bit about what you saw happen during the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to long-term care facilities. And so we're going to have a great conversation. I think people will find it very interesting, his knowledge of what happened in the midst of this and what the next steps are moving forward. One of the things that we hear a lot about is when can I go see my grandmother or my grandfather in the nursing home? They've been shut down, and it's been so sad because a lot of these folks are missing their parents, they're missing their grandparents, they want to go see them, and those folks want to see their kids and their grandkids and their great grandkids, and it breaks my heart to see it. So we're going to have a conversation all about that. I think it'll help people understand where we're at and the great need and really the disaster that we saw in Pennsylvania in our nursing homes during the COVID pandemic here. He has a great understanding, so it's going to be really exciting.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we look forward to hearing your podcast. And Representative Owlett, thanks for keeping us posted on these important items.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure, and thanks for the good work that you do to communicate to folks here in the 68th District.
And thank you for joining us here on the Homepage Network. I'm Rhonda Pearson.
The Mansfield Laurel Health Center is now accepting patients in the state-of-the-art Susquehanna Health Medical Plaza at Mansfield. In the same facility, Susquehanna Health is offering physical and aquatic therapy, imaging, laboratory, cardiology, and sports medicine services. For more than 40 years, our 6 Laurel Health Centers have provided high-quality, compassionate care to the residents of Tioga County, offering family-based primary care services, obstetrics, pediatrics, preventive screenings, and diabetes education, as well as outpatient counseling and therapy services. Our passion is to provide comprehensive health care to all who need it with dignity and respect.